the frozen heart. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Bucket Think Tank for Disney Royalty number 12, Frozen. So, I don't like this movie. I don't hate this movie, but I feel there, if you recall in previous videos, I talked about how Princess and the Frog was a return to form, sort of like a love letter to the Disney Renaissance that came before it. And Tangled was sort of a promise of newer, bolder things to come, while still sort of honoring the past of the Renaissance, which I think was important. I felt was a really strong way to go. I feel like Frozen is sort of a step back from the present Tangled set. And with Frozen 2 coming, which I kind of always knew, I couldn't help but wonder ultimately why. And looking back at this movie again, and I'm still trying to figure out why. And maybe it's not my job to find out why. I mean, I don't understand why this movie is so popular. I'm not going to say it's a terrible movie. I don't like it. I think that it takes a lot of steps back. I think that in the attempts to be, innovative, or rather, a very different, more forward-thinking Disney movie, we instead decided to just sort of repeat the tropes we said we would subvert because we didn't actually subvert them. Frozen is really good at committing to halfway measures with a lot of its ideas and themes. A lot of this movie actually is really smart. I will grant this movie that. It does want to take themes of sisterhood, of true love, of, being yourself. It does take those and attempts to craft a really great story with all three, but because it tries to do three different themes at once, while at the same time trying to subvert popular tropes with the understanding that subverting tropes makes you a better storyteller, which it doesn't. How the tropes are executed is more important. All the themes don't really get fully realized. And I realized that the more I kept trying to record this movie, then trying not to record this movie, and, trying to, get my thoughts out, I was like, no, there's this, there's that, there's this. There's always something really good in this movie that it then just drops the ball totally on to favor once halfway measures with every other theme. And I couldn't really figure out exactly how to fix that for this review. And then I thought, well, for every other Disney World's review, we talk about the movie, the princesses, and the prince if there is one. And while this movie has two princesses, and I would argue two princes, or if you want to be a queen, a princess, and a prince, and technically a prince, there isn't much to talk about when it comes to Hans and Kristoff. I can sum them up pretty quickly, and we'll just knock them out of the way now. Hans is everything wrong with the Disney villain, because he's not a villain. He sort of breaks the primary rule of how a Disney villain functions, which is we, the audience, know they're the villain. Because as Hans, reveals that he is the villain, nothing that happened before that makes any sense. I mean, yeah, you could say he himself says, "Oh yeah, I came here to hopefully, entrance the queen, have her have an accident." Didn't work. Turns out she's really distant, and then I found you, Anna, and I laid the good moves on you, and then everything fell into place from there. Which means that for Hans's plan to work, he had to have known that Elsa had ice powers, was going to freak out, that Anna would leave and leave him in charge, and then everything else would work out exactly as he planned it for that one moment. He just falls into being the bad guy. And people treat Hans like he's the greatest villain ever. Like, there have been polls like, oh, well, Hans is the best Disney villain. I'm like, he's not. Okay? Well, he's not even like the meanest or the worst Disney villain. He only actually does one thing, and that's break Anna's heart, which is bad. Is bad to be sure, and he does leave her to die. But let's recall villains like Shan Yu, Gaston, Frollo, Maleficent, Mother Gothel, and of course Cruella de Vil, who wanted to make a coat out of puppies. Think about that. Hans has one moment to prove he's the villain, and it is a good moment, but because everything is built up to that moment, we the audience are sort of left feeling a bit uninterested in this prince. He's not that charismatic, he's not much of a character. His one moment is all most people in the audience need, which I don't agree with. Kristoff is an attempt to make something new. I'm going to give full points to Kristoff. Kristoff, I think, he's a holdover from what I want to call the Aladdin mold. And we don't have a lot of characters in the Aladdin mold. Our most recent one before Kristoff was Flynn. In other words, there's a certain smooth, sly, sort of scoundrel-esque personality to them. With Kristoff, he's more like a dude, but he has a certain cynical nature to him. Like, he calls out Anna with, the question of true love. Like, how do you fall in love with the guy you just met? And he challenges her on that belief. Like, so what's his last name? What's his favorite food? What color are his eyes? Are you ready for this? And over the course of the movie, he falls in love with her. And he actually gives one of the better scenes in the movie, which is when he drops off Anna at the castle and he wants to leave, and Sven ultimately has him sort of very angrily confess, like, yeah, I love her, but, she's got her prince, and then he sees that she might be in trouble and he goes off. It's a really great scene, and if we wanted to really play with the idea of true love, we could have made this a bit more of a tragic love story, where, Hans is the good guy, and Kristoff goes off, heartbroken. You can say the same stuff still happens, but instead of making Hans the bad guy, you just have to have the kiss not work. And either Hans or Anna have to realize, hey, maybe we don't know anything about each other. Or Anna come to that realization. I think that would work, because Anna all of a sudden has a thing for Kristoff when Olaf realizes, oh, Kristoff's coming down here. Yeah, look at that. So that's pretty much it. I think the movie would have been served better if Hans and Kristoff had possibly been brothers, or if they'd been allowed to interact with each other. Or if there was a stronger family dynamic to play off the theme of sisterhood, of siblings, or even family. I think that would have helped that idea. Because as a movie about sisters, they're just sort of sisters in name only. And there is some brilliance to that. Coming up to, let's go with Elsa. Elsa is an interesting character because there's more of a mystery to her than anything else. Like, her powers honestly don't make sense, because not only can she make ice, she can make snow, she can make clothes, and she can also create life. And this isn't that abstract an idea, to be sure. I mean, Frozen is based off of Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen, and this movie does lift sort of themes from it, but more modern retellings of the Snow Queen have led to the Snow Queen being sort of a victim of someone else. So this almost sort of does work. The problem is, though, Elsa doesn't really quite fit for this movie, or even actually more appropriately this story. The idea that Elsa isn't the villain, I think, is sort of a detraction to her character, because for the most part, Elsa's primary character trait is she's scared. She's scared of her powers, she's scared of hurting others, particularly her sister, and because the last thing her parents actually told her really was, you've got to hide your powers, and this has sort of led people to think, or rather imprint on the idea, that Elsa's story in Frozen Hold is about letting go, being yourself, and people have taken an extra step by, the LGBT movement, which is why people want Elsa to have a girlfriend in Frozen 2, which I think would be a mistake, and I'll get to that in a moment. But the problem with this example and how Elsa's been handled is it doesn't quite address the issue. Jordan Peterson and people like Ben Shapiro have sort of created out that this movie is a sort of leftist propaganda, and I would argue most art is in one form or another propaganda, maybe not political propaganda, but it is designed to instill a feeling, an emotion in you, to make you sort of think or experience something a certain way, to understand someone else's point of view. The problem with it, and this is a major criticism that a lot of people have, is that Elsa doesn't feel like someone who actually takes responsibility, because the universe itself doesn't make sense. The idea that Elsa's trying to, be herself and sort of let it go doesn't quite work, because no one knows she has ice powers until the end. And the reason people are really freaked out about her ice powers is because she almost took some guy's head off. And this is sort of something that we saw in Captain America Steve Rogers when he was revealed to be a Hydra agent in Civil War II, which was like Civil War II The Oath is like the only real reason to read Civil War II. But he talks about how, the superhero community has become a group of people that would like to chastise people for being afraid. Like, why are you afraid that, while your kid was at daycare, another kid, had laser beams fire out from his face? And why are you worried? Why are you scared? Like, you're being stupid. And that would be interesting, but the problem is, if you imply the idea that Elsa is quote-unquote gay or trans or whatever, and that her ice powers are a representation of that. The problem is that, and I mean this, no one being gay, trans, straight, or anything has ever actually caused anyone harm. Someone being gay does not harm anyone else. Elsa's powers, which have no real explanation, no real focus, no real purpose. In other words, there's no one else within the story to further this idea, and just leaving her untapped and untested with her powers is what leads to it, her own fear. And it sounds really good. The idea that she has to let go, be herself, but in response to letting go and being herself, Elsa then runs away from all responsibility. In other words, because she wants her ice powers, she wants to use her ice powers, she feels she can't be queen, but there's no reason why she can't. This problem is because there's no actual antagonist in this movie. Hans is not the driving force, and there's a certain beauty to there being no actual antagonist. In other words, this story just happened. Which is life. Sometimes stuff just happens. There's no evil dude in the background going, yes, soon Arendelle will be mine. And I'll use this girl with her ice powers as my weapon, as my attack dog. I'll get her on my side. And only her sister can get in the way, which would have actually been a much stronger story with the idea that Elsa had a trusted advisor. Someone who said, well, it's best to keep you away from your sister. And, sort of play that idea in her head that, it's Anna's fault. If you just, stepped away from her, if you just abandoned this, left me in charge, I got this. I'm your buddy. I've got your best interest at heart. A classic Disney villain like Jafar, I think, would have totally helped Elsa's story because she'd have someone to play off against. Because the illusion of control, again, a really strong aspect here. When Elsa, goes off, has her great song, and then it's met with reality. Oh, by the way, you don't actually have control of your powers because there's a winter abomination coming ever since you left. Leads her to sort of drawing back in on herself again, thinking that she was a fool to think she could control this. The problem is we don't actually get an understanding of what this is for it to really matter. And then she lashes out again, and then she's effectively given the cop-out angle by realizing that, hey, I love my sister, undoes the sacrifice to an extent. Elsa accidentally hits her sister with her ice powers for the second time, and Anna then sacrifices herself to save Elsa from Hans, and then Elsa cries, and then Elsa turns back to normal, and we're not quite sure if it's Elsa's powers or the power of true love, which we thought was, the true love's kiss, which I will give more points to that as well, because, the rock trolls don't say it's a true love's kiss, it's just an act of true love. But the problem is, this movie doesn't play around with the aspect of true love as well as it thinks it does. So, yeah, and here's why Elsa shouldn't have a girlfriend. Or anyone, actually. First of all, much bigger change for her not to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or anyone. And two, Elsa's story in Frozen 2 should really be about her loving herself. Because I don't think Elsa does. I don't think Elsa loves herself. She loves her sister. She loves that her sister loves her. She has to remind herself that her sister loves her, that there are people that love her, but she doesn't love herself. Until she does that, she'll never have any real meaningful relationship at all. And we do see that Elsa's one actual quality is she does love Anna. We see this with Olaf. She creates a snowman. She had no idea she brought it to life. On a subconscious level, I think we can all sort of realize that Elsa wanted Anna there. Like, there's a part of Elsa that wants her sister to be here, maybe to talk her out of this. We don't know, but it's not just a coincidence that, she made a snowman. It looks a lot like the snowman they played with that night. And then that snowman just happens to find Anna. Coming up to Anna, Anna is sort of like Kristoff. She's a bit of a holdover from the Disney Renaissance era. She's a very Ariel-like character. She's actually she's a bit of Ariel with a bit of Rapunzel. And I want to say a bit of Aurora. Aurora's actually a very interesting princess if you think. She seems to be the biggest holdover from the Disney Golden Era next to Cinderella. But what makes Anna interesting is that she spends her entire life waiting for her life to begin. That's sort of what her song is. And this is where the movie sort of falls apart again earlier. And to be clear, everything for Do You Want to Build a Snowman I think is really great, really strong, sets an amazing tone and start to the movie. It falls apart because the logic of this movie is Anna has no friends. Like, Anna has not lived her life. She spent her entire time waiting outside the door for her sister to come out so they can play. And this sort of works to an extent, but the problem is this implies that Anna has done nothing else. Like, Anna has no friends, Anna has no social life. And the also real subtle thing is that, Anna and Elsa spend the entire time talking at each other, not to each other. Which is clever, which is fun. Anna thinks she understands Elsa. Elsa thinks she understands Anna. Turns out they don't. They don't listen to each other. Each of them thinks that they know what's best. And with Anna, because Anna's so excited and so interested, we see this play off earlier in the movie when, Anna has to wake Elsa up, you want to build a snowman, and then they go out and play, and then Anna won't calm down. She won't slow down when Elsa's telling her to slow down with the jumping, and so Elsa accidentally hits Anna in the head trying to save her, and then she loses her memories. Then you go into later on, same thing happens. Anna gets super excited when she meets Hans. She wants to marry him. And Elsa says, like, what are you doing? This leads to Elsa's powers triggering again. And then Anna shows up later on at Elsa's castle, pushing, not understanding what's going on. And the problem is that we took away Anna's memories. Imagine if, during that moment at Elsa's castle, she gets knocked out or she passes out and she remembers what happened that night, all those years ago, and now she realized that once again her actions have caused her sister distress. If Anna could ever calm down and take stock of the world around her, realizing her thoughts and actions have consequences, or rather be more aware of the feelings of others, she could avoid this. She could avoid a lot of things, but she doesn't. She, like Ariel, lets her passions drive her the most. Elsa had just been the villain, and we imply there was another story afterwards. Like, imagine if that night, everything happens. Elsa loses, Elsa accidentally hits Anna, and her parents sort of explode, and Elsa runs off. And she becomes the villain years later, totally ready to wreak her revenge on everyone, but, Anna having to save her, and by extent Arendelle. I think that would have been awesome as well. There was apparently plans to make Elsa the villain, which I think, again, would have helped serve the story a bit more, and maybe have helped Let It Go. I think Let It Go would have personally been better as a sadder song. The idea that Elsa is totally willing to be alone if it means she can save people. The idea of the cold loneliness doesn't bother her. Or whatever. So, coming up to parallels. Kristoff is very much a Gendry Waters from Game of Thrones. He just really is. He really, really is a down-to-earth guy, 9-to-5 worker, a good amount of cynicism to him, but a softy at heart. And that's who Gendry is. Hans wants to be Littlefinger, but I definitely think Oscar Diggs from Oz the Great and Powerful would also sort of work too for a different kind of villain. I think Littlefinger's a bit too devious for what Disney wants to do with Hans or whatever. Hope Hans doesn't come back in Frozen 2. And Anna and Elsa, well, the best versions of Anna and Elsa are Anna and Elsa from Once Upon a Time, because that story is actually really good. The idea there actually was a Snow Queen who was actually the aunt of Anna and Elsa, the sister of Queen Iduna, and that they had a falling out. There's another story there which would repeat, where the tragedy of one pair of siblings leads to this horrible disaster. It is then the power, the love of these two siblings that is able to save the day ultimately. I think that would have been a lot better and a much stronger direction for the movie. Well, with that in mind, let's bring this video to close here. If you're new to the Bucket Think Tank, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe. Check out some other videos on this channel, and I will catch you all later. This is the Bucket Think Tank signing off. Thanks for watching, and may your fandom serve you well.